everybody, this is dkdynamite for another episode of my community quote series, where today we're going to be talking about quote-unquote old Aether coming back to Black Ops 6 Zombies. Definitely stay tuned, but before we jump into that, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below, drop a like, and as a big reminder, there's plenty of brand new article coverage going up on dkdynamite.com for those who want to stay up to date with all things Call of Duty. Now, I made several videos in this quote series dissecting some of the craziest community quotes, some of which I actually agree with, like the one here in today's video. Now, we're about a day or so away from the COD Next broadcast on August 28th. I'll be live from DC playing multiplayer, zombies, and even Warzone. Hope to see you guys there in my chat. My stream will be linked down below in this video's description, but cannot wait to get my hands on Liberty Falls. The map looks absolutely insane based on the HD screenshots that have come out and the little bits of gameplay that have also been revealed. But Liberty Falls absolutely shocked the world a couple of days ago, considering the intro cinematic cutscene which released on the Call of Duty YouTube channel. It was an absolute blast reacting to it live with you guys out there in chat. We all went crazy. I mean, first and certainly foremost, Nolan North is back. All of the lore that people out there took the time to read into with the Cold War intel has officially paid off with Black Ops 6. Although Cold War was made under different circumstances, through a pandemic, limited resources, and certainly a shorter development cycle, there was still a lot of world building and a lot of really rich lore set up for this new Dark Aether storyline. A lot of it, if not most of it, wasn't told through the typical cinematic cutscenes in Cold War like we saw in games such as BO3 and BO4, hence why a lot of folks out there may have been a bit confused when they saw the cutscenes for both Terminus and now Liberty Falls. But dissecting the trailer here a little bit, taking a look at the fact that Eddie gets sucked into the Dark Aether by Samantha, we can't help but question, right, how long will Eddie be in there? Will he gain more knowledge while he's in the Dark Aether, which could actually turn him into a bit of a villain or more of a villain throughout Black Ops 6 Zombies? I think it's going to be a crazy case of maybe us, Requiem, helping Samantha break out of the Dark Aether because we don't want her to be in there. But what if she's truly too far gone? What if she goes fully psycho in Black Ops 6 and it comes to this crazy conclusion where we have to rescue Richtofen from Samantha's grasp? That would be a crazy dynamic for our Requiem crew, considering what just happened at the end of Cold War and what is about to start happening with Terminus and Liberty Falls. Now, while this could set up a map where we go back into the Dark Aether, which would be phenomenal, I love the fact that the dynamic of Richtofen versus Samantha is back in the spotlight. This is something that we saw quite a bit in the old Aether storyline, which really did finally come to a conclusion as of a couple of years ago, but now we're seeing that again, but in a bit of a different way. Now, considering this tweet right here, as you can see from Detonated, both Liberty Falls and Terminus take place at the very same time, with Maxis potentially starting both outbreaks at once. She, however, chooses to teleport Janus employees and Richtofen, but doesn't teleport the Terminus crew, or doesn't take them, I should say. So she could potentially be helping Requiem, right? For her to use her powers, she kind of has to create Dark Aether incursions and create these outbreaks, but maybe she didn't intend to hurt the Requiem crew, even though that's technically what she's doing. An incursion just happened to break out over at Black Site 13 where Requiem was being held. But how crazy would it be, as we talked about on the podcast just a couple days ago, if Eddie comes out of the Dark Aether and says his famous line that we saw in the old storyline, which is, "I know now what I must do." He doesn't have all the knowledge, and I think the secrets that he may be missing, or the ones that he's seeking, could be within the Dark Aether, and he'll kind of come out like Sam did during Firebase Z's Easter egg with even more knowledge and possibly even some abilities that he didn't have before. Now, could you imagine if with Richtofen going into the Dark Aether, he comes out with additional memories or all of the memories of every iteration of Richtofen from the old storyline? We're talking Ultimus Richtofen, Primis, and the dozens and hundreds of other variants that got touched on quite a bit and discussed quite a bit through the Chronorium and the old Aether timeline that we could still read. And I think what's happening with Samantha is really interesting because obviously time works differently in the Dark Aether than it does in the real world. There was an image from the COD blog a couple of weeks ago when Black Ops 6 Zombies fully got revealed, and the image itself did depict the new trial machine over on Terminus. However, on the screen of this machine, it said SAM Trials, S.A.M. So it's an acronym, but we weren't sure what that could have meant. We're like, okay, SAM Trials? I mean, she's in the Dark Aether. Is she the announcer? Is she in charge of the zombies? Totally. I mean, lots of questions to take away from that, and clearly we weren't supposed to see that image because that image has now been swapped out over at the COD blog. So apart from that detail, and with her potentially taking over not just the Dark Aether and all the zombies, but she may be taking over a bit of AI as well through that trial machine, and now the orb that we saw at the end of Forsaken, which actually trapped the Forsaken himself. So in that map, at the very end of that Easter egg, right, we actually trapped the Forsaken with the help of Samantha, but he doesn't seem to be in there anymore, right? She seems to have taken full control of that. So does that mean she fully consumed the Forsaken himself? Did she become him for a second? Is she now the head honcho of the Dark Aether? It certainly seems that way, and again brings us back to that classic Aether tale that we saw over a decade ago where she was in charge. Now I do want to revisit that moment where in Firebase Z, Samantha comes out of the Dark Aether having learned quite a bit of knowledge and having gained some powers. She was in there for a lot longer than we all thought because again, time works differently in the real world than it does when you're in the Dark Aether. So when she comes out wearing Primis gear, or gear from our old characters, our beloved OG crew from the old Aether story, that has us all thinking, right? Are those characters fully wiped from existence? If so, that's what we kind of infer from Tagger Toten. How could items that belong to them be in the Dark Aether? Still at least, right? Could there still be some remnants left over of them? It appears that's the case, so I can't wait to see how they expand on that a bit further with Black Ops 6. I think with Eddie going into the Dark Aether right off the rip in Liberty Falls, that's going to set up quite a bit to the point where a lot more may be returning from the old Aether storyline than all of us could have predicted. Now, while I do think there is a chance we see the return of our other three characters, Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takio, I think they'll save that for a big moment at some point in the future. They're probably not going to want to do that right away, you know, in DLC 1 or something. They have a really rich story up their sleeves right now, especially when it comes to how this new dynamic's going to work between Richtofen and Samantha. But something I also just touched on a few minutes ago is the idea that S.A.M could have maybe consumed the Forsaken. This is a concept that has been touched on quite a bit through various pieces of intel in Cold War and Vanguard. We obviously know Zykov became the Forsaken and became more and more powerful over time the longer he stayed in the Dark Aether, and after having come across some old dead giant beings that he then consumed to then gain an advantage over every other entity inside of the Dark Aether, right? He became the boss. After defeating him though, Samantha seems to be next in line considering she's in there and is probably the most powerful being inside of the Dark Aether. Now it's unclear how Vanguard's going to tie into all of this. You know, there certainly are quite a few elements that we know are canon and make sense, but when it comes to Cortifex, having been the boss during that time, right, during World War II or shortly after that in the 40s and 50s, and figuring out the whole plot point with the construct, him wanting to be fully in charge and to consume other worlds, considering all of that was explored, it is totally possible that, yeah, Zykov came across his body and as the Forsaken became more powerful after consuming him. So if Samantha consumed Zykov many years later, I can't even imagine how powerful she may have become. But this is also a concept when it comes to powerful beings that was touched on a bit at the end of Black Ops 4, the idea that the Shadow Man and Dr. Monty were once one. We never got to really see that ancient being known as the One kind of fleshed out as a villain or anything, and that's probably more in part because Black Ops 4 obviously got a lot of support cut from it, and there were significant changes to how the DLC season probably ended, but who's to say they can't really touch on that again at some point in the future, right? We just saw at the end of the MWZ Season 5 Reloaded cutscene, somebody with a hat that could be the Shadow Man was seen walking up to Ava and then pulled her into that Dark Aether portal. What are the odds they're also in Liberty Falls within West Virginia, possibly even in the same room that we see Richtofen in within the Liberty Falls cinematic cutscene? So there could be something big going on here, right? Eddie's going back in there, Samantha could be in charge, the Shadow Man may be returning. I mean, this is literally old Aether at its finest, but possibly returning in an even bigger way, and a way that maybe is similar to what people wanted to see in the original ending for Tagger Toten, right? The end of BO4. Before the collapse of the multiverse, people out there really wanted a great war, you know, Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man going at it, or us facing Dr. Monty with the help of the Shadow Man. So if the Shadow Man is returning, who's to say we can't revisit some of those plot points in the near future, just on a much bigger scale in what is arguably going to be a better game, Black Ops 6. I think it's also crazy that a piece of intel that, again, wasn't really explored in a cutscene at all, nor was it really talked about in dialogue, but a piece of intel that confirms Weaver accidentally killed Richtofen's wife and son, that is expressed to us in a very creepy way at the very beginning of the Liberty Falls intro cinematic. During a nightmare that Eddie's having, he's remembering that unfortunately his family was killed. And just for a bit of a recap to those out there that didn't actually read the intel in Cold War, Maxis wanted Weaver to assassinate Richtofen after believing that he killed him. He ended up burning the house down with Richtofen still being inside. He ended up surviving, but his family unfortunately didn't. Now, Weaver thought the wife and son were staying elsewhere, and he felt immense guilt about this accident, so you can imagine the crazy plot point this is setting up, the guilt that Weaver feels while being locked up in Black Site 13. He totally feels that guilt that he got Requiem locked up because of a mistake that he made many, many years ago, and he didn't mean to do that. However, it is worth questioning, why on earth did S.A.M want Richtofen dead? What did she know about him, or what did she assume about him to have her convince Weaver to do this. I also think it's worth asking, right, with the fact that the director wanted Samantha locked up at the end of Cold War Zombies, he wanted her locked up because he considered her a threat, but she now just became a bigger threat because she's in the Dark Aether. So it looks like a lot of these characters are not on the same page and really didn't realize the potential consequences of their actions. And now we're seeing a very crazy plot unravel where there really aren't any black and white heroes or villains. It's really a situation where every character has made mistakes and every character almost truly believes they are the good ones, the morally righteous characters here, and it's going to create a very spicy dynamic, especially as we go through the DLC season of Black Ops 6. Now, you guys saw the Wunderwaffe is obviously back, and I ended up getting, somehow by accident, one of the most liked comments underneath the Liberty Falls intro cinematic cutscene. Something funny that Fajardi was saying while I was streaming was that this ended up being Richtofen's firearm of choice. It just was a really funny comment considering he just had this weapon laying around, and if you're wondering, right, did he make the new Wunderwaffe in this Dark Aether story? The answer is yes, but I'm assuming this is the Wunderwaffe DG2, whereas a base Wunderwaffe prototype was seen in Vanguard because Dr. Vogel, with the help of Dr. Strauss, did come up with the plans for this Wunderwaffe, or maybe found some type of research from the Dark Aether experiments that led to a discovery to allow them to make this. But Richtofen has mass-produced what seems to be the OG version of the weapon that we know and love from the old Aether story, so that weapon's going to be back in its full glory, presumably as a bonus item you can find in Liberty Falls. But the last thing I'll end with is a fantastic theory that I saw Perka and other zombie fans out there over on Twitter talking about, the idea of this really interesting timeline reset happening as of now in the storyline. So at the beginning of Modern Warfare 3's Zombies marketing last year, we did get to see that Requiem was dead around the table, and it was unclear, what led to that. It was unclear if that was spoiling a big event that is eventually going to happen in Black Ops 6. If that were to be the case, I'm sure Treyarch would find a really creative way to kind of write the story that lead to that with some elements of surprise along the way, so that it's not just something that, is predictable or something that we all expected because of MWZ. The theory goes like this, right? Everything has happened and played out that led to that moment with Requiem dying, but now that Ava has been taken through a Dark Aether portal by what could be some mysterious person, could be the Shadow Man, could be somebody else. Because of that, this is going to create a branch that somehow connects to Black Ops 6, where Ava ends up in the 90s and helps our crew out, which will then in turn prevent Requiem's death at that round table, as we saw in MWZ. So this could prevent MWZ from ever really happening, on top of the fact that we could see Ava and Richtofen meet. And what can that set up, right? Ava potentially teaming up with our crew, with Requiem and Richtofen, to face off against an evil Samantha, which is her mother. I mean, there's so much that can happen here. And ladies and gentlemen, please let me know down below in the comments where you think all of this is going with both Liberty Falls and, of course, Terminus. But that is about it. This has been dkdynamite. Leave your thoughts down below in the comment section. How are you feeling about the Liberty Falls intro cinematic cutscene? Do you agree with the community when they say that old Aether is back? Because it absolutely is, baby. But let me know how you're feeling down below. Really hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in DC.